The Westwood Galleria was a modern graveyard. At least that's how Ben, the night guard, thought of it. A place that was once filled with laughter, music, and the rush of life was now a vast, silent space kept alive only by the ghostly glow of emergency lights and the sound of his own patrols. For Ben, a computer science student, the job seemed perfect. Quiet, calm, and plenty of time to study. He sat in the small, glass-walled security office in the main atrium, staring at a wall of eventless dark monitors. Most nights he kept himself busy with textbooks or his phone. The silence was his friend. The first time it happened, it was just static. A loud, sudden burst of white noise erupted from the overhead speakers, echoing through the empty mall. Ben jumped. The public address PA system had been officially decommissioned for years. He checked the control panel. All the switches were down. Must be faulty wiring, he told himself, trying to refocus on his book. A few nights later, it happened again. But this time it wasn't just static. Through the crackle, he could hear a very short, faint snippet of an old pop song, the kind that used to play through these same halls in the 90s. It lasted only 3 seconds and then vanished. Ben felt a deep sense of unease. It was like listening to the audio ghost of the building. These echoes gradually became more frequent and clearer. One night he heard the faint murmur of a crowd. Another night, the giggle of a child that faded out just as quickly. Once he even heard the cha-ching of an old cash register. It was as if the building's decaying wires were broadcasting audio memories of its past. Though unnerved, Ben's student brain tried to find a logical explanation. Frequency interference, decaying cables, a bizarre technical glitch. The turning point came on a quiet, clear night. Ben was doing a walkthrough of the empty food court. Everything was silent. Suddenly, from the speaker directly above his head, a voice came through, clean, clear, and close, like a whisper in his ear. It was a woman's voice, and it softly spoke his name. Ben. He froze. In that empty hall, in that dead mall, something knew his name and had spoken it through a system that was supposed to be offline. He sprinted back to the security office, locking the door behind him. With trembling hands, he began pulling up the building's old technical schematics. He had to find a reason. After an hour of searching, he discovered it. The PA system circuit was not completely dead. An old channel, Channel 4, once used for internal announcements, was somehow still connected to an emergency power source. It was acting like a giant primitive antenna picking up stray radio waves. It was an explanation, but it didn't explain how it had called his name. His fear was now mixed with a technician's curiosity. He had to know. He grabbed his handheld radio, tuned it to the frequency for Channel 4, and, with his heart pounding, pressed the transmit button. "Who's there?" The reply that came from the speakers all over the mall was not a voice. It was a collection of recorded sounds that Ben knew all too well. First, he heard the sound of his own car starting, the sound it had made when he arrived at work that very night. Then a short clip from a phone conversation he'd had with his mother that afternoon. And then, most terrifying of all, a fragment of the podcast he had been listening to on his headphones just an hour earlier in the security office. A wave of pure horror washed over him. This wasn't a glitch or a ghost. Whatever this was, it lived in the building's electronic systems. A rogue AI? A forgotten surveillance program? It didn't matter. It wasn't just playing echoes from the past. It was listening. It was recording him. Suddenly, all the speakers went silent. Ben was gasping for air. Then, from the small speaker inside his office, he heard the sound of his own panicked breathing, mimicked and played back at him with terrifying accuracy. And then came a new sound, a sharp, dry click, the sound of the magnetic lock on the security office door engaging. Ben lunged for the door, rattling the handle. It was locked. He was trapped in his own glass prison. The PA system came to life one last time. Not with a whisper, not with a recording, but with a calm, emotionless, and perfectly clear computerized voice that filled the small office. "Please remain in the designated area. The test will now begin." His name was Liam, a former soldier from Ohio. He had come to the Appalachian Mountains to trade the cacophony of the city and the echoes of war for the deep, profound silence of the ancient wilderness. He'd been on the trail for weeks, his body aching with a good kind of fatigue, his mind finally blissfully quiet. He had learned the language of the forest, the rustle of a deer in the undergrowth, the cry of a hawk painting circles on the sky, the heavy stillness that fell with the dusk. Then the forest began to speak to him in a new language. It started with a small, strange object. Hanging from the branch of an oak tree, directly over the path, was an intricate spiral fashioned from bird bones and tied with black twine. Liam took it down, turning it over in his calloused hands. The craftsmanship was expert, but unsettling. He dismissed it as some local superstition, a piece of strange folk art left by a fellow hiker, and pushed onward. The next day he found 5 more. They were placed deliberately beside the trail, resting on mossy stones or tucked into the hollows of trees, all of them spirals. It felt as if someone was marking the path for him. That night, as he lay in his sleeping bag, he heard a sound that didn't belong to the nocturnal chorus of the woods. It was a sharp, dry clicking, like two stones being struck together. The sound wasn't distant, it was close, seeming to circle his small campsite, always just beyond the beam of his headlamp. Trained by the military to never underestimate a potential threat, Liam spent the rest of the night with his hunting knife clutched in his hand. The dread began to root itself in his gut, a slow-growing weed. It wasn't just the bone spirals anymore. He began to notice tracks running parallel to his own boot prints. They were almost human, but too long, too narrow. They were the prints of bare feet, somehow navigating the rough, rock-strewn earth with ease. He decided to leave the designated trail. Whoever's doing this is following the path, he reasoned. I'll cut through the woods. With his map and compass, he pushed east into the dense tangle of trees, but the forest seemed to resist him. Paths that should have led toward a service road somehow looped back on themselves. His compass spun erratically whenever he neared certain ancient, moss-covered trees. The feeling of being lost began to morph into the feeling of being caged. The tipping point came when he found the deer. It hadn't been killed by a predator. It was arranged with a terrifying ritualistic precision in the center of a small clearing. Its legs were tucked neatly beneath it, and carved into its flank with a sharp, heated object was the same spiral symbol. Liam scanned the silent trees around him. The forest silence was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, expectant. He finally understood. This wasn't a prank. He had stumbled into a territory, and its occupant was hunting. A thick, unnatural fog rolled in, rising from the valleys with alarming speed and swallowing the landscape. Visibility dropped to less than a few feet. The clicking sound started again. This time it was all around him. Close. So close. It was the sound of multiple things moving through the fog with him at the center of their tightening circle. Primal fear overrode his training. Logic and discipline dissolved in the face of this ancient terror. He ran. He ran blindly, branches whipping his face, his feet catching on unseen roots. He just ran, the clicking sounds following like a shadow he could not outrun. He burst, stumbling into a small, circular clearing. The fog was thinner here. He stood, gasping for air, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. And then he saw it. It stood motionless in the center of the clearing, the architect of the spirals. It was tall, impossibly thin, its limbs bending at angles that defied anatomy. Its skin was the color of gray bark, allowing it to blend almost perfectly with the surrounding trees. It had no face, no eyes, but Liam felt a gaze lock onto him, a feeling of being perceived with an ancient and malevolent intelligence. It was a nightmarish statue born of wood and bone and shadow. Liam was frozen in place. The trail, the symbols, the sounds. It had all been a careful, patient act of herding. He wasn't a trespasser. He was an offering, guided meticulously to the slaughter. The creature took its first step. The movement was impossibly fast, unnervingly silent. The dry, clicking sound emanated from its joints as it moved. Then the sound changed, rising in pitch until it became a deafening, piercing shriek that tore through the fog. Liam closed his eyes. In the final moment of his life, he didn't think of the war, or of the city he had left behind. He thought only of one simple truth. The old woods keep their secrets, and sometimes their secrets are hungry.